Hi, I'm Sam Edis.
And I'm Amy Nelson. Welcome to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
This is a show about the world's most remarkable women, their professional and personal journeys.
Together, we'll hear from gold medalists, best-selling authors, and leaders of the world's most iconic brands.
Listen every Thursday or join the conversation anytime on Instagram at What's Her Story Podcast.
Nicole Lapin is a former news anchor turned finance expert. Known for her straight talk, she's the author of 4 books, including her most recent, Miss Independent. She's the current host of Her Own Money Rehab with Nicole Lapin and the host of Hatched, a business competition show on the CW network.
You froze your eggs and you were pretty outspoken about that.
Yes, I did. I
What
froze
led
my
to that
eggs when I was
decision?
31. I did casually document it on Good Morning America because while I was going through it, I thought I could do anything. And I had a really high tolerance for pain. And my father was a surgeon and medical stuff seemed okay. But then when they gave me a bunch of shots to take home and I had to go to shot school, I was like, holy shit, I need to show other folks what this is like. And I don't know if you guys have gone through any IVF process, but when you start, you're supposed to be on a certain day of your period, and I happened to be on that day when I went in to do the consultation, and so I said, let's just start. Why not? I mean, it's always going to be busy. There's always going to be stuff to do. I need to fly to New York, and it was never going to be a good time. So when I did it, I was really surprised by the process because I think in theory, there was a lot of discussion about why you should do this, and it's this insurance policy, but I didn't hear anything about the logistics of going through it, and it was really freaking hard. And I thought I might do it again, and I opted not to. I was good with one, and I recently fertilized them almost 10 years later, so I was nervous about that process as well.
And, fertility journeys are long and, we all go through our different journeys, but 2 years ago, you had a miscarriage, and you also shared that publicly.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. I was, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think you were finishing something.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, I think, miscarriage is horrible, and we don't talk about it a lot in our society. And so I was really moved by your story. But what led you to share it? Because it's painful.
Well, my therapist says that my coping mechanism is advocacy. So as soon as I went through it, I realized that I had the luxury, and my partner had the luxury, to take the day off. And I didn't realize how valuable that was. I took it for granted that a lot of women in particular, especially women working paycheck to paycheck or hourly, don't have the opportunity to take any time off. And it was right around the time that New Zealand passed a law that allowed women to take miscarriage leave. And I was like, why in the United States we don't have this as well? So I started a petition for businesses to offer miscarriage leave. My partner's company was the first to sign it. He actually talked to his co-founder and said, hey, do we have a miscarriage leave? And he's like, actually, my wife went through this. He confided in him because they'd never talked about that before. And they were like, yeah, we should have the best miscarriage policy, and they did. And I think Reddit has one of the most generous policies, but for me, I kind of went into action mode right away and tried to advocate for those who didn't have the same opportunities I did.
Well, you have had independence as a theme throughout your life, and it's certainly the theme of your newest book, Miss Independent. I think there's so many things that you've done that I've read about that scream independence, from freezing your eggs at age 31 to, never having gotten married, to living in many, many different cities and earning your own money. What do you think in your childhood led you down this path?
All of it. I think I grew up in a very traumatic upbringing. I actually always tried to hide that part of my story and thought it was my biggest weakness. It ended up being my greatest superpower, but it was only once I could actually be open and honest about it. I grew up in an immigrant household, so first generation American. My father died of a drug overdose when I was 11. My mother, as you read in the beginning part of my book, I bailed her out of jail a bunch of times when I was in middle school. And so I was dealt a pretty shitty hand. And I played it the best I could. I think I won, but I didn't really have another option, and I really didn't have any more to lose. So I think everything with my childhood and the way I was brought up in a chaotic and abusive home, I think led me to the only option that was available to me, and that was independence. I didn't have any backup plan. I didn't have a couch to go home to if something failed. I didn't have, family money if I lost my job. So that was the only path for me to take of independence.
But so many people in those circumstances just fall away, right? They collapse under the weight of the stress, or they don't make it through high school. They don't make it to college. They don't make it through college. They don't end up having successful careers. What was it that made you different?
I thank you for that question. I'm not sure, actually. I think I went the opposite route. I used to get a lot of people say, "Oh, your father must have made a call for you," or something like that when I started at CNN when I was 21. A lot of my colleagues didn't think that was possible without some sort of connections. And of course, it couldn't have been farther from the truth. I wasn't born anywhere on the bases. I was probably born in the alleyway by the trash cans. And so I think I probably overcompensated the other way. I became the valedictorian of my high school and my college. And the only reason I say that, because that and 350 will get me a soy latte these days, is that, I really self-prescribed not drugs or alcohol to hide, but work and then some more work. And of course that led me, that I talk about in my third book, to a complete mental, physical, emotional burnout and breakdown from, constantly self-prescribing work since I was in my teens. I started on the air. I started at the Chicago Merc, which I thought was a mall at the time, when I was 18 years old. So I was on the air for a really, really long time. By the time, I was in my late 20s and early 30s, and it kind of all came to a head.
Backing up just a second around, kind of that drive and that ability to get from a pretty horrible childhood with a lot of trauma to where you got, even by the time you were 21. Because I always go to the tactical, how did you get the job at the Merc? How did some 18-year-old who's just gone to Chicago to attend Northwestern, which how you got to Northwestern is another story, but how did you get that job? Did you just send in a resume? How did it happen?
Yeah, well, at the time you sent out a lot of VHS tapes, which I just found my VHS tape. Of course, it had a red box, unlike, the black boxes with the scribbling on it. I tried to have mine stand out, and I worked at the cable access station, and then I just stalked this station chief in downtown Chicago, who had a station in Milwaukee, and I begged for an interview because I said I will do anything. At that point, through Northwestern, they had a program where I was a reporter in Sioux Falls, South Dakota at the CBS station, and Lexington, Kentucky at the CBS station. So I kind of did an ad hoc little education for myself and went to these smaller markets. And back in the day, before YouTube and no skipping steps, you had to go to these small markets and sort of work your way up. So I was like, okay, I know that I need to do that. A lot of girls in my broadcast class would go to these small markets, marry the police chief or whatever, and stay there. I was like, nope, putting on my blinders, like want to be in and out of these places. No offense to these places. I just, had probably an unhealthy ambition at the time. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm ready for big market Milwaukee. Like, this is my big break. I will take the train. I'll do anything to get to the CBS station in Milwaukee. And once I finally got the interview, I said all of this, and the station chief was like, you don't get the job. And also, you should learn more about geography. You can't take the train every day to Milwaukee. But do you know anything about business news? And this was my worst nightmare. My boyfriend in high school said he wanted to be a hedge fund manager, and I thought he wanted to be in gardening. So I was completely clueless. I told you that my family just used cash and in nefarious ways too. So I didn't want to think about business or money or much less talk about it to the world, but I needed a job. And so I said, absolutely, I know about business news. Of course I know about business news all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. And I was like, holy shit, I guess I have to figure out business news. And so, yeah, I realized that money is a language just like anything else. And I figured it out. And that was quite a place to do that. But yeah, I just needed a job. And I think a lot of times when we have these conversations about entrepreneurialism, you guys know, it's like, go out and do what you love, YOLO, FOMO, whatever, And I'm like, I didn't have the luxury to do that. I wanted to be a poet when I grew up. I started as an English major. I wanted to sit under a tree and write poetry. And then I needed to pay the bills. And so there's no shame in doing things that you need to do at the time. And for me, I found the shaded part of that Venn diagram, the things that I loved and the opportunities I had. And then I found the shaded part because I became a writer, just not the kind I expected.
Amazing.
In your book, you talk about how everyone has some degree of money trauma, right? And we know that you had a traumatic childhood. What role did money play in that childhood, or the scarcity of money?
Yeah, I have an irrational fear still to this day, and I talk about money. I teach others about money, of being broke, alone, and homeless. And it doesn't matter how much is in my bank account. And I just constantly still catastrophize and have to talk my way out of it. I have little discussions with myself a lot that that's not going to happen. And it's really helped me to embrace, not to get too esoteric or wonky, this stoicism philosophy where we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And I always try to entertain the worst case scenario. Okay, so what if I lose this project, or what if I lose this job? Am I going to be alone, broken, homeless, and living in the gutter as I imagine? No, I'm not. I have friends. I have my chosen family. That's never going to happen to me. So still, I have financial demons that haunt me, but we all have, I think, to some extent, micro or macro financial traumas, whether, our family. If you look at me and you're like, girl, I didn't have to bail my mama out of jail with the cash under the sink next to the maxi pads like you did, but, maybe my parents hoarded or clipped coupons or spent frivolously, and that affects how you look at money. And then macro traumas like the dot-com bubble or the Great Recession, the housing crash or the pandemic. This all affects how we look at money. And so it's really important to realize that just because it's been a certain way doesn't mean it's the way it needs to be. And oftentimes I get questions about, raising financially responsible kids. And I don't have kids yet, but I would say that just by being a kid, it is so important to lead by example. So you could try to find all the little kid financial books that you want, but if you're a financial mess, that's not helpful because your kids are watching everything you're doing.
So it's a very fair point. Well, related to that, sort of, in talking about money and, and kids and your own experience, like how do you define financial independence?
For me, financial independence is having the ultimate FU money to leave a crappy job or leave a crappy relationship. And I think far too often women in particular stay in terrible relationships. I've received a lot of notes of women staying in abusive relationships because they're scared of taking care of themselves financially. And for me, that is having the ultimate financial independence, is having that choice and having that freedom.
Well, it's so funny because so much of the rhetoric around this topic, which Amy and I are both super passionate about, is around, well, what if he leaves you? And not if, what if you want to leave, right? We often think of it as the other person's choice as opposed to a woman's choice in what she wants to decide for her future. Along those lines, you've had a lot of high profile relationships and with men who are very, very successful. I remember, and I don't know how you were, Amy, but when I graduated from college and then again graduated from business school, I always used to say, I want to meet someone who hasn't yet made it so it can be ours together and that he doesn't hold that power over me. That's how I saw money being used growing up in New York City, where, if one person in the relationship had an outlandish amount of money, then it was like he was able to win the younger prized trophy wife. And so it seems like if you've been drawn to a lot of really successful, ambitious men, I guess my question is you kind of went the opposite way, right? You didn't want the guy who's the plumber who might one day have a plumbing empire. You went with people who were as ambitious as you were. Is that fair to say?
Well, I have a very colorful dating history. Not all of it is on the internet. So, for me, I was always attracted to someone who was ambitious and could relate to, some of that drive that I had, for better or worse. And, for me, regardless of a relationship, it's always important to have your own back. And it's always important to take control of those conversations that you mentioned. Like, what if he leaves me? What if he asks for a prenup? Like, fuck that. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here, but hopefully it's okay.
You can swear.
I think I
You're
can.
fine.
Okay, great. You suggest a prenup. So I'm even talking to my fiance now about prenups. And I'm like, great. I made my own money. I have my own stuff. Like, cool. Let's talk about a prenup. And so I don't know where in the zeitgeist we've somehow relinquished control of these conversations. I think you can reframe them and take them back. And I think we should. Unfortunately, a lot of women want to get their financial lives together or have to get their financial lives together when they get divorced or when their husband dies. And during some of my previous book tours, when we were out IRL, not just URL, I'd have young women or I'd have their moms, unfortunately, tell me, like, yeah, she went to XYZ Ivy League school, but I just want her to marry a rich guy. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is still a thing. And if we, try to hide behind this boss bitch stuff, like I wrote the book Boss Bitch. And so this rhetoric, unfortunately, is not actually becoming reality in the way that we'd hope it to be. And so I think that having a proactive financial literacy discussion is really hard to have. I've tried to do it, of course, but it's just like having a proactive healthy eating plan is hard. It's, once you unfortunately get a diagnosis, then you have to be reactive and you have no other choice but to do it. So I see a lot of women who have gotten divorced and either are screwed in one of two ways. Either they don't have any money or they don't have any credit because all of the bills were under somebody else's name. So in a lot of senses, not having a prenup and not protecting yourself can screw you in ways that you don't expect. Like, by the way, debt gets shared. in a marriage, as you guys know. And I think that having control, whether it's with an estate plan, any sort of advanced directives, power of attorney, prenups, is better than having the state decide what your affairs are going to be like.
Do you feel like men get different financial advice when they're young men, when they're boys or young men, or like?
Yeah, and I quote a study in Miss Independent that shows young boys associate these power words with money, so these ambitious type words, and young girls associate scarcity words with money. So obviously, finances isn't something only a guy can do. There's not any magical, special sauce that men can only figure out, but they talk about it way more, and they talk about it more confidently. I mean, I'll tell you, living with an entrepreneur, whether he knows something or not, he for sure says it really confidently. And so I think that's something that we're missing. I don't necessarily think there's a knowledge gap. I think there's an action gap. I don't think knowledge is power. We have so much knowledge out there. I mean, there's all the books, forget about the ones that I've written and all the others and all the podcasts and all the articles. I mean, knowledge isn't ultimate financial power. Action is power, and you're never as young as you are today, because you hear these stories or excuses like, I don't have enough money to start, I'm too old. All these things are just stories that we're telling ourselves. And so, yeah, I was just drinking out of my coffee cup. One of my slogans from Miss Independent was, I'm glad I didn't invest earlier, said no one ever. No one in the history of the world has ever said that. It's like you never regret a workout. Like, getting my ass on a treadmill is very hard, but afterwards, I'm stoked. Same thing with investing.
I like to call it an ambition gap, because I think that we raise just the way we raise little girls to take their first ballet lesson and little boys to enroll in robotics classes. It's a constant theme, the princess narrative. What kind of narrative did you have going into, you talk about in your 20s, it was all ambition. At what point did that change for you and you decided, okay, I want a fuller life, not just my career?
Well, I had no choice when I ended up in the psychiatric ward of NYU in the middle of the night with my shrink and my assistant canceling my entire schedule because I was depressed and suicidal and had all of these issues that I never dealt with, and I couldn't outrun them anymore. And it was only then that I realized self-care is either the biggest asset or liability in your career. It can take you to rock bottom like it did for me, or it can bring you more success than you imagine. So it was only then where I realized, I'd set this little goalpost for myself. I'll be happy when I get to the network, or I'll be happy when I get to New York, or I'll be happy when I get one book. I'll be happy, but really when it hits the New York Times bestseller list. Okay, but then I'll be happy only when I have 2 books. And, there's always something there. And for me, I never got my brain to the other side of happiness with that construction. And so it kicked my ass. And at that point, I had no choice but to create a fuller life for myself.
So what did you do when you left the hospital? What did you do?
I went on a crazy journey. We started this show joking that I was Tracy Flick of podcasting. I felt like I was Tracy Flick or valedictorian of the psych ward because I was taking notes. I was like, I want to learn. I want to figure out how to hack this because we don't learn this stuff in school. I mean, if I were in charge of the world, we would not only learn about financial literacy growing up, but also what I learned in dialectical behavioral therapy, for instance, that really helped me and changed my life in an outpatient program. Basic interpersonal skills, interpersonal effectiveness, stress management, distress tolerance, all of these things that are really important in all aspects of business. So I went to see every healer in the history of the world, Amy. I went to see, Balinese medicine men to Indian chiefs to psychics to Miraval to God knows where. And I felt really fortunate at that point to be able to afford a lot of this because it was really expensive. And so I took notes along the way, and I didn't necessarily expect it to turn into a book, but I felt compelled to be like, okay, everybody, this is the cheat code. If you don't have the money to do all of these therapies, here's the Cliff Notes version of that. So I really, I took a year and a half probably, and just soaked all of the woo-woo stuff that I could possibly soak up and tried to turn it into an action plan. You know, my brain works in like steps and metrics and measuring to metrics and all of these types of things. And so, I went on a journey to figure out how to do that.
What was that moment like? I think so many people, especially now, are suffering from mental health issues. What was the precipitating moment for you that said, okay, like enough is enough. I'm going into the psychiatric ward. This isn't just normal stress.
I've thought a lot about this question, and I have a line in Becoming Superwoman where I talk about this. That's one of my favorite lines in the book. It says that my breakdown wasn't a spontaneous combustion precipitated by a single event, but a lifetime of smoldering embers that finally caught fire and incinerated everything in its path. And I think it really was that. I was just finishing up my second book tour, and when I went out to do my third, I had a team that was like, are you okay? Because like the second one created all this stuff, and I was like, it wasn't the book, it wasn't this one thing, it was this whole lifetime of self-hate and self-neglect. And I had a lot of still imposter syndrome now about talking about how to indulge in self-care, because I was like, I'm no expert in this. I'm more of an expert in self-harm or self-hatred than self-care and self-love. And that's what made me hopefully a good person to talk about it, because I know what it was like. I know what that darkness was like. I know what it's like to have many rounds in the ring with darkness. And I also know what it's like to be broke and live on a brown rice and beans diet, because it felt fancier than ramen.
What do you, well, so I was going to ask about kind of, when you think about, so Sam and I have had the privilege to interview a lot of women in their 70s and 80s who are still working, still building, still, just out there creating in the world. What do you hope that your life looks like when you're in your 70s? What do you hope your career looks like?
I love that. Sometimes I talk to my old lady self. I have a lot of dialogues with myself, my younger self, my older self. I think my younger self would finally be proud of me. I kind of lost my way a little bit and focused on some of the things that, perhaps she wouldn't have loved. And I think my old lady self, I would love for her to have the financial freedom and the ability to not only pursue projects she loves, but have no regrets on her deathbed. I think about my deathbed a lot. The word that Chris Pan does, the My Intent bracelets, where you put like the word on the circle. I've often put time, and then I tattooed that, so then I stopped putting that. But then deathbed, because I think about, what am I going to regret not being brave enough to do?
I forgot about Tony's bracelets. I haven't had one for a while. I need to get another one.
Yeah.
So
I had time on the bracelet for a long time, because it always reminded me that time is our most valuable asset. You can always get more money. I've had a lot of money. I've not had a lot of money. Having more money is more fun. But money is a tool, like anything else. A hammer can be used to build a house and to tear it down. But you can't get more time. And so that has always also been a constant reminder.
So, what was the moment when you felt like, okay, I'm healed, I'm ready for the next chapter of my life?
I don't think you're ever necessarily healed. I actually wrote an epilogue to my last book where I felt like I was on the verge of another breakdown right in the precipice of the launch of the book. And I actually delayed it 6 months, which my former self would have never imagined doing. And I said, balance can be used as a noun and a verb. And often in this discussion, we use it as a noun. Like, I found balance, it's there, I'm good. And I think for me, it's been helpful to use it as a verb because it's something that's constantly in motion. It's something you constantly have to work on and cultivate. So I think that for me, remembering that balance and chaos coexist. They have to coexist because sometimes I get in a habit even still where I'll get back to that balance or self-care stuff like after this. And, I think that there's never an after this. For me, realizing that you have to be in both. In fact, both have to coexist to have the other. And so it's a lifelong journey. I think I'm always going to be a reader of my my third book, which is crazy because I'm the writer, but also I think a lifelong reader.
Where does your fiance Joe fit into this timeline?
He and I met over the pandemic. I moved from New York to LA. I drove by myself, and I didn't know that I would end up back in LA. I grew up in LA and I lived in 10 cities since then. It always felt like home to me. So I ended up getting back here and connected with a matchmaker named Talia Goldstein, who's the founder of 3 Day Rule. Have you guys had her on the show? You should. She's fantastic.
No.
We haven't had her on the show, but I love Talia. She's amazing.
She's amazing. And so she and I had always tried to connect over the years, when I was in between relationships, and we never did. So she sent me an email, and I jumped on the phone with her, and she's like, I think I have somebody for you. What's up? And at that point, I got a lot of clarity about what I was looking for. Like, I needed to have my right-handed wedding ring before I had my left-handed one, and have that most important relationship first, which I did, and found a lot of clarity about what I was looking for and who I was. And so I just was super real with Talia, and I was like, here's where I'm at. And she's like, well, I don't think you're right for this guy, but I'll put you in the database. And if there's a guy that meets your criteria, I'll call you. And what do you think I said?
Maybe I am right for the guy.
Said, yeah, maybe I'm right. Like, why do you think I'm not right for the guy?
Yeah. Or I just said, I'm not a database girl, and I would like somebody to meet my criteria versus the other way around. So I had no intention of joining this service, but whatever it is, on principle, I'm going to feel good about this conversation if I get off, not being in a database, waiting to meet somebody else's criteria, but the other way around. And oftentimes men join these services as clients, although Allie Webb had just met her, I don't know if fiance yet at the time, through Talia, and she was a member. And so I thought, okay, she's like a boss bitch whisperer. She gets it. And so I joined with very low expectations. And, there are only a couple of truisms on Wall Street and life. Buy low, sell high, and it's better to beat low expectations. And I had very low expectations for it. And the first person they introduced me to, they said, well, we actually have, he's not a client, but he was an early investor in 3 Day Rule. And he was actually the only male investor who invested in Talia while she was pregnant, fundraising. And he's always rejected all of the offers that we've put before him, I guess. But he's really excited about you. And that was Joe, my now fiance. But I always joke with him that he invested in the company to have the right of first refusal on all the best ladies. But of course he did not. And yeah, we met.
So what was your first? What?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we met. Our first date was at Neptune's Net. There was nothing to do during quarantine, so we ended up talking a lot. And he came up with this little ruse that I found out later, that he needed to move really quickly. And I had moved from New York and love housing everything. If all else fails, I would be an interior designer, and I just love housing porn of all varieties. And so I had like compass folders ready to go, and he's like, well, maybe you can show me some of the options that you had in there and still liked, and maybe you can help me. And I was like, sure, no problem. And I did. And I later find out he didn't really need to move, but he wanted to lock it down. And so he was like, well, you take a key or whatever and, come and go. And then we looked at this first place we looked at, which is the place we live in now. He was like, no, you know what? Just move in with me. And so I had a place that I loved. That was like my bachelorette pad that I actually lived next to the actual bachelorette. This was a very funny story too. When I first moved in, I was sitting outside and she was so sweet and got my Postmates or something. And I was like, yeah, this is my bachelorette pad. Like, I'm basically going to just lean into the idea that I was put on this planet to help women with money and not get married and have kids, and that's all good. And she's like, do you know who I am? And I'm like, I don't know, you're my neighbor. And she's like, I am the bachelorette. And I'm like, I've never seen the show, not one, not ever. And I was like, oh, that's crazy, you're Southern, and like, you sound so, like you want the guy to be chivalrous and all these things. So if the bachelor proposes to the bachelorette or whatever on the show, is it the opposite on the bachelorette? Like, do you propose to the guy? I had no idea. I was so confused. And
I was saying, I actually don't know the answer to that, if the bachelorette proposes.
Oh, I can school both of you on that show. Yeah.
Teach us everything, Sam. But
yeah.
But yeah, I ended up leaving that place and we moved in together, and he proposed probably less than a year later.
Oh, that's an amazing story. And then in terms of, I guess, your own financial discussions with him and your own fears, is this your first engagement?
It is. I know. What a sucker.
So does it bring up all sorts of like financial merging issues for you?
No, I mean, we're a very financially nerdy family. He's a fintech entrepreneur and an anti-poverty advocate and thinks about money issues a lot. And we both had very similar upbringings, actually. Both of our homes were foreclosed on when we were little, which had a huge impact on our lives and
Wow.
contributed to our desire to want to help others. It really comes from the most honest place within me that I want to teach my former self what she didn't know. And now that I, got beyond the red velvet ropes of Wall Street that I never thought I would, I'm like, oh, I want to tell you guys all the things. And so he feels very similarly. And so, yeah, having financial discussions at this point, is definitely a much easier one to have. But a lot of couples do fight and separate because of money more than anything else.
All right, well, we are going to go to our speed round now. We're just going to ask you a few quick questions, and you can give us quick answers. Aim, do you want to start?
Yes. What book are you reading now?
The Art of Stillness.
What is the last vacation you took?
To Hawaii over the holidays.
Who leaves you starstruck?
Janet Yellen.
That's a good answer.
I have issues.
You present, you've made these Tracy Flick jokes and you present as very perfect. What's the last imperfect thing that you did?
Like in the last couple hours?
Sure.
I put my lash on incorrectly because there was a shooting, unfortunately, on the 405 today, and so the glam team couldn't come, and so I had half of my lash on as of 1 hour ago.
Good. All right. Well, Lou Burns has been listening, and he always comes in at the end with a male perspective and often the sharpest perspective. So, Lou, take it away.
Wow. Thank you so much for being on our show, Nicole.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for having me.
You are definitely a light. I was just laughing all throughout this whole podcast and thinking about Joe. He's a sharp one, isn't he? That boy got some game.
He has some nerdy swagger for sure.
Oh, right. So there was something you mentioned about home interior decorating, and I thought about the many roles you play in life, and you wrote quite a few books, and you've done quite a few things. So what role in your life do you enjoy the most?
Well, when you bring up home design and work, if I read between the lines, I do really enjoy making a beautiful home. I feel like a boss bitch at work, but I actually really like being sort of in my feminine energy at home, and that's not for everybody. But we have a show on my first podcast, Hush Money, where we debated who pays on a first date, and my producer just assumed that Jason, my co-host, would say that the man should pay, and then I would say split, and I was like, hell no, I'm not touching, no. And it's not because I can't pay, it's because I don't want to. And so I did the fake reach a lot, proudly, because I think that there's a difference between needing somebody and wanting someone, and I really enjoy that role in my life now, which is odd. I never thought I would even have that role.
Now, here's the real question. What would you like to be doing that you're not doing right now?
I would really like to start a family. It's harder. Who knew? Back in the day, oh my goodness, we thought we could get pregnant like at any day of the month, no matter what, and it's harder than you think. So, or maybe some people have experienced that, but that's a role that I'm excited to find somehow one day.
You're gonna have some pretty kids.
I'm smart and ambitious.
We love you, Nicole. Yes, perfect answer.
Amazing. Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Amy, Nicole makes me want to save money and really dig into my finances in a deeper way because I have a lot to learn.
I mean, she really does. And the thing is, I love how she walks this line of being really pragmatic and I feel conservative about money, but then talking about it in a really fun way, which I think is one of the hardest hurdles for people.
Absolutely.
Because money is scary to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Her writing is very, it's very straightforward, but fun. It's hard to make a finance books fun, but she manages to do that. And her personal story is one of a lot of struggle, and it's quite inspiring. Even just the fact that now she, found true love and is rewriting a new chapter of her life is really inspirational.
I think it really is. To hear a woman who has gone through such a hard childhood put all of these pieces together and not only succeed professionally, but personally is pretty amazing. Thanks for listening to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
We would appreciate it if you'd leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, connect with us on social media at What's Her Story Podcast.
What's Her Story with Sam and Amy is powered by my company, The Riveter, at theriveter.co, and Sam's company, Park Place Payments, at parkplacepayments.com.
Thanks to our producer, Stacey Para, and our male perspective, Lou Burns.